Welcome, Globo, to this second chat. Nicolas, as I said in the email, he recently joined Globo as a board member. I met Nicolas almost 2 years ago in a very interesting meeting that we can cover later. I think from the very first moment we connected a lot on something that both we care a lot, which is global happiness, and which we think it's the biggest impact we can have as a platform. Nicolas decided to invest in Globo. We'll also cover that later. So far, he's invested in 2 rounds. His current company, Drake Enterprises. He's invested a total of almost 50 million euros, which has now become the second biggest shareholder, or the biggest total investment in the company. And as I said, he's now in the board, and you know, he's a guy that I admire a lot, and I think inspires the rest of the board a lot, and usually drives and pushes in the board something that, you know, other standard investors don't push as much, which is, you know, our role in this world beyond our P&L, right? And what's our impact in society and in the planet. So how I've thought of structuring the call is using the first third of the call, 20 minutes, on Nicolas' story, which, by the way, I still have to learn quite a lot. There's a lot of things about his first, you know, big business experience that I don't know, with a company that he ended up selling to Walmart in Chile. The second 20 minutes, we can talk more about Globo, his investment in Globo, his current motivations, how we're seeing the current COVID impacting the world and Globo and other stuff. And then, as we did with Bea and Neil, we have an open Q&A where you can start adding your questions, and I will choose the most interesting and we can answer them at the very end. So, Nicolas, thanks for spending this time with us. It's a pleasure. The first, I would say, you know, the first question that I have for you is who are you? You know, how do you introduce yourself?
I have no idea who the hell I am. It's a very profound and difficult question for anybody to answer, and I'm sure we're all from time to time asking ourselves the same question. Who are we? What do we stand for? What is our real nature? And what do we want to get out of life? I guess everybody around the globe, wherever you may be, has perhaps very similar aspirations. I define myself in the business world as a grocer. I've been involved in the grocery business most of my life, and in a period of extreme crisis, when I left business school, I wasn't going to get involved in any business related to my family, but things were so dire, so difficult. We were actually confronting a very inescapably serious situation in the early 80s. None of you guys were born then. But what we confronted then was, you know, a severe economic downturn in the world. The cost of money those days was around 12 to 14% per annum, something that is difficult to even imagine today. And in our little country, in Chile and South America, we had a very severe devaluation. And so overnight, we were totally screwed up. And we had a very severe liquidity crisis. So that experience was, I would say, a blessing. Something difficult to imagine today when young people normally have, you know, too many options. And one of the complex things to decide, if you're a young person just leaving whatever it is, university, whatever, is, you know, what am I going to do? and there are so many options out there. And so that is why I think many young people tend to postpone. You are an exception, Oscar, and perhaps many of the people that surround you today are an exception. You have decided to take on a real challenge. In my case, we were totally screwed up, and so the options were very simple. You either die or you survive. And we had a little business, supermarket business, which was guided towards the upper income segments of the population. You know, like a very top-notch Corte Inglés operation when you go to the Corte Inglés supermarkets, you know. And so clearly we were going to get nowhere with that, and we had many competitors challenging us, competitors in the sort of low price segment, the Mercadonas of this world, if you will. And we realized that we were totally screwed up, even though we had a fantastic brand, a fantastic history. We were top of mind for the upper income segments of the population. And then we had to make a decision. Either we go broke and we liquidate the company, or we transform it radically. The sort of challenge Globo faces today, and transform what was a total disaster, total chaos, into an opportunity. So how the hell do you do that? And of course, in my life, I have never invented anything new. I haven't got that capacity. What I have tried to do is basically look around, open my eyes, sniff around. In those days, take a lot of photographs, and copy best practices. And so yes, I did a bit of traveling, and so we ended up creating a new concept within the existing company. Of course, we went through a whole series of financial turmoil, and so we had to renegotiate with banks and this, and it was very, very complex in practice, because we had no money. We were actually broke. So we went through a very, very severe situation, but I explained to the banks, you know, what our ideas were, and of course, they had no option either. I mean, they said, well, you go ahead and do it, you know, and report back to us on a regular basis. So we ended up within this company creating a competitive company with a small group of very, I would say, energetic young people who were out to create something new, for us at least. And it was basically an operation that based its sort of ethos on offering the lowest prices by far. So we needed a very low cost structure, exactly the opposite to what we had before, and offering customers, you know, easy access and by far the best prices. No promotions, everyday low prices. And so everything was focused on that. A different team, and we went into the emergent segments of the population, the poorer areas of the country. And that actually began to work. People understood the rationale. You know, we don't spend any money on publicity, no promotions. We don't even pack your groceries. You bring your own means of packing your groceries, and we have no service. You just go in there, and it was a warehouse type of atmosphere, something which is pretty obvious today. But then it was quite radical, and it was a copy. I found an operation which was called, I remember, Food for Less in a place called Little Rock, Arkansas, in the state of Arkansas in the United States. And so I traveled around in the United States, in Europe, and of course Spain, etc. And so we decided to make a trial run, and this thing actually worked. But then we soon realized that that was not going to be enough. We saw that in Spain, the French had invaded Spain in the supermarket field and the hypermarket field, and the Spanish were totally screwed up. And there were no real Spanish companies, with the exception, initially, a little company from Valencia, managed by engineers, very similar to, I would say, Global, and in many ways. We should study that further, Oscar. And I went to visit them, and they were the only Spanish people in Spain who were actually doing something that was going to challenge and counteract the French invasion, the hypermarché who had come to Spain. And they would basically bought up everything, and they were dominating the field. And of course, I came to the conclusion that if the French were doing that in Spain, they were already beginning to do it in Brazil in a big way. They were going to sooner or later do the same thing further south, in Argentina and in Chile. And so we were totally screwed as well. So despite what we had done with our everyday low price small format, we needed to offer sooner than later a one-stop shop experience, which included not only food but non-food, and clothing, and basic goods for homes, for cars, for the emerging segment of the population. So we created another format, which was the hypermarket format. And I went to Spain, and I hired a group of 12 mercenaries, and I called them that because they were basically people that had to be disruptive. We didn't have the talents within the company then. We needed people that were even more ambitious, so I recruited a group of 12 people that were in the sort of third tier of Spanish retail companies. And with them, we created another format, which is the hypermarket format. And it was, tremendously successful. We went to China, of course. We opened up an office in Shanghai to bring in very cheap, good quality and very cheap clothing. That was an absolute killer. And so we had, the good clothing and the lowest prices. Selling jeans, for instance, at a ridiculous price for the market in Chile at that moment. Of course, by then, Walmart, which was purely a non-food operation, had begun operating with food. I went to visit them on many occasions. So one of the things that I practiced a lot was visiting people and knocking on people's doors and saying, hey guys, I come from a silly little country on the other side of the world. We have a little company. We're out there to serve the emerging segments of the population and to improve people's quality of life out there. The poorer people that are just beginning to emerge in this little country, which had been through, a very complicated period. And I think that enthused people. That was my story. And they opened the doors to me openly. And I even got to know a guy called Sam Walton. And he gave me lots of tips. Sam Walton was the founder of Walmart. I'm the only guy around that actually interacted with Sam Walton. I go to visit my friends in Walmart today, and I'm the guy that used to interact with Mr. Sam, as they call him now. He's now dead, of course, and his children, one of his kids was in the board, chairman of the board. And now the family is totally out of the operation of the business, but they're in the philanthropic side, doing an incredible job in education. So I went around expressing a purpose. We want to improve people's quality of life in this emerging little country, which is perhaps doing the right things, contrary to the rest of the Latin American republics. And I think that enthused a lot of people. It certainly enthused me. I mean, I had many options available. I was going to go to Harvard and do an MBA, the usual stuff, and then my own career. But I decided to stay and stick it out because I thought that could be fun, and I wanted to have an enjoyable challenge in life, very much like you guys. The only difference in my case, it was easier in my case because we were totally screwed up, and so that's why when one confronts a problem, a crisis, like what we're confronting today with coronavirus, it possibly is more of a blessing in many ways. And I'm sure that Oscar and the team in Global has understood it this way. We can talk about what we're doing in some of our companies, but really this is a fantastic opportunity as long as you are prepared to take on, very bold initiatives, which sometimes they can fail, and then when you confront failure, you have to readapt, learn from that. But I'm a grocer at heart. What does that mean? I'm linked to the people on the street. And I find that fascinating. It's a unique relationship. And so I'm not a philosopher, a historian, an artist. I admire those people, a musician. I'm just a simple, down-to-earth guy that can walk in the streets and can interact with people and understand their feelings, their needs, and think of solutions for those people. So, as you can gather, there is perhaps a very intimate correlation between the purpose that I have tried to give to my life, and the purpose that you guys are seeking with Global. So that in a nutshell. And then we grew the company and developed it, and then we came to the conclusion that we had to be much more professional and had to be accountable to third parties. And so we opened the company up. We took it public in the local stock exchange in Chile, and then a year later we took it public in New York. And the story was that, help us improve the quality of life of the emerging segments of the population in Chile and perhaps in the rest of the region. So in a nutshell, a grocer.
Cool.
And of course, a family man. I have 8 grandchildren. I've remarried, and so we have 3 children on one side, 3 children on the other. Most of the children, except one, are all married and they have kids. And so family plays an important role. It ensures you keep your sense of humor. And so, of course, little kids couldn't care less of who you are, what you've done. They just, want to have perhaps fun. And so my real ambition in life today is ensure I don't become what in English one would call an old fart. In other words, somebody who is grumpy, somebody who isn't, connected to the world. And instead, I aspire to be somebody that is connected to the world, that aspires to have fun. And that's why whenever I see younger people, like you guys, I feel motivated and enthused. And I think that I can learn a great deal from you guys, and maybe I can share some experiences with the younger generation, and realize that there is, in the end, not much difference between you guys and an elder guy like I am. I've just turned 64, and I'm just beginning. I'm just beginning, and who knows what the end will be, and that doesn't concern me. And so I'm not here in the mode of trying to retire. I would like to reconnect with people and activities that are stimulating. And that's one of the reasons why we are connected to Global, and a group of people that have given themselves a purpose in life.
Nicolas, so during the growth of DNS, you said you went public twice, or first in Chile, then in New York, and then you sold. How does each one of these things change, the entrepreneur motivation? How does it change the company? These are decisions that probably we're going to start facing now in the next few months. Like, do we start, pushing for just becoming an independent company? Probably there's going to be offers on the table to sell the company, which is something that I guess nobody is motivated to do yet. How was your experience there? Was each one of these happy moments, sad moments, and what was the motivation to go for these steps?
Well, the real motivation was to try and enhance the delivery of our purpose, improving people's quality of life, and doing that in a very effective and quick way. In other words, the whole idea, for instance, of blitz scaling the little book that I don't know, you've read or something, which is perhaps the source of inspiration for many of the newest companies that we've seen come to fruition recently, and might be the source of inspiration for the aggregator category of companies. This rings a bell with me. We were doing the same thing, really, and we wanted to move fast and do it before the rest. So the whole idea of first mover advantage, and actually not inventing anything new, but perhaps executing in a better way, with even better technology, and certainly the most fundamental aspect was people. And so really the core competency in our company was the formation of people. And instead of having a head office, we never called it a head office, we called it the School of Service. And it was designed and built, and of course it still exists today, Walmart operates there, as a university campus. It was designed after Hamburger University, the McDonald's campus, just in the outskirts of Chicago. So, what you see today in Silicon Valley, all that thing was invented many, many years ago. And so when you go into the offices of all these companies, Facebook, etc., for me, it's really nothing new. And we created a campus. So these stages, I would say they were tough. It was a learning experience for me. I mean, going on road shows and having to sell the idea was a big challenge. I remember we were stuck in New York for 2 weeks rehearsing the whole thing, and we used the services of an investment bank, Morgan Stanley. They helped us a great deal, and then we went on a road show around the world. Selling the idea of improving people's quality of life on the other side of the world. And so we had to sell the country, we had to sell the concept, we had to sell, the whole idea of an emerging economy, and why our investors could play a very significant role in helping us improve people's quality of life. And of course, it was a very rational business decision as well. And so I would say highly challenging, and that's what we like, and a learning experience. And so we traveled all over the place. We did the same thing in Madrid, by the way. We were then quoted in the IBEX in Madrid, and that was after New York. So we went through the whole process, and I thought it was a fascinating, challenging process, exhausting. I had to put together a small team of very high-powered young executives in investor relations, and they helped me. And we went around speaking to investors all over the place about this ideal, and I think that enthused them a great deal, and we were tremendously successful in attracting investors. So that wasn't a problem at all. Then we had to execute, of course, and then we had to demonstrate that we were actually capable of doing this. And so we reinforced our team with some recruits which we brought in from Spain, as I told you, and we went full blast executing and opening up stores around the country, these big hypermarkets. Significant investments, each store, and developing a supply chain, many goods coming in from China, establishing an office in Shanghai, and moving much faster than anybody else. And so we actually, from being a company that was on the verge of bankruptcy, we ended up being the #1 company in Chile in this field. We did have competition in Chile, of course. It wasn't that there wasn't any competition. There was and there is, a lot of competition in Chile, which is a good thing. but we ended up with a market share of around 35%, and we were, what was it then? By then we were about 45,000 people involved in the company, and we made a significant impact in the whole country. It's a long, thin country, from Arica, the city of Arica in the north, to the city in Punta Arenas in the south. That's about 4,500 kilometers distance. So from a logistical point of view, a nightmare. And so all the technology behind that was crucial. So much so that when we began interacting with Walmart, one of the things that they, of course, valued was the fact that from a technological point of view, we were clearly state of the art.
At that stage, I guess, this is a very profitable company at that point. Why do you decide to sell? Like, what is the motivation there?
Very good question. That was about 10 years ago, so age 55, approximately. And then I, going back to your first question, I said, well, what do I want to do over the next stage of my life? I want to have an active life. I want to be involved in significant challenges, God willing, and be surrounded by interesting people. My first option was to take this company to the region. In other words, to grow in essentially South America. And we looked at various options in Latin America, in Mexico, in Argentina. We actually opened up a chain in Argentina, which after a while wasn't successful, and so very similar to what you've been through, we had to close that. It was a very tough decision. One of the most difficult decisions is to realize that, even though you have the right ideas supposedly and you have good experience in a specific market, you haven't actually developed a concept and a business that can be successful, even though you are successful in another market. But anyway, the whole idea was to grow, and we entered into an agreement with another major retail company, which is basically involved in apparel, and we were going to merge and then grow together in Latin America. The Monopolies Commission didn't allow us to do that, so that was another mistake. I never thought of that. We proposed the merger, and it was supposedly going to be approved. And the last moment, it was not approved. So then we went through, a short crisis, which lasted about 24 hours. And I remember I thought everything was ready to go, and we were going to have, we had a very ambitious plan of going into Colombia, to Peru, and eventually Mexico and Brazil. And I was sailing actually then. I was out in the South Pacific Ocean, and I was sailing, and I was called on the phone and say, hey, something, the Monopolies Commission have, they have not authorized this. And I said, right, okay, well, that's not very good news. So let me just think about this thing. And I was actually in a regatta, sailing in the South. And after a while, I received a phone call from a friend of mine in Walmart. And he said, Nicholas, did you hear the news? Your proposed merger hasn't been approved. Yeah, I know. So, well, I'd like to speak to you. And then I said, well, I don't know, it's going to be rather difficult. And I'm scheduled to go on an excursion to climb Mount Denali in Alaska. I'm going with my son, and it's something I promised him for a long time ago. I said, no problem, I'll meet you in Alaska. I said, well, I mean, it's got to be 2 weeks' time. And so, well, we met up, and he said, look, Nicholas, why don't we do something together? And then I thought that, the lesson there is keep all the options open, and have a personal relationship, a good relationship, even with your potential competitors or your direct competitors. And I always showed them our plans, etc. We ended up, for instance, buying Carrefour. Eventually, the French came into Chile and they installed themselves in Chile. And I used to go and visit them in Paris, and they began to struggle. Well, they called me and said, come over here. And we closed the deal in 24 hours in their offices in Paris. And so I always kept the doors open with our main competitors, who were much larger than we were, of course, and much stronger than we were. But they respected, I think, our openness. And so after this, I said, right, let's join forces with Walmart. But then, I said, I've got to perhaps think of something different, another way of improving people's quality of life and being connected to the young people. And it's not too late to begin from scratch again. And so little by little, we spoke to Walmart, and I said, if they're gonna do a good job in Chile, then we might consider selling our operation to them, so that they can take charge of our company and make it develop and make it grow even further in Chile, which is what they have done. They've done the same thing in Mexico. They've done the same thing in the United Kingdom, where they bought local companies. In Mexico, they bought a fantastic company called Cifra, and in the United Kingdom, they bought a company called Asda. And those companies are still, operating and serving those countries very well. So then I began engaging the idea of let's get out of this business, but basically to start something new from scratch. And that's where we are today. We are starting something new, and it is a real problem. It is very difficult when you say right, and you go through what is euphemistically called a liquidity event. You don't want money. Money is complicated, and then you're surrounded by bankers, and they're offering you all sorts of things, and you've got to be very careful not to get carried away. And so the spirit behind Drake, but then we thought of a name. What are we going to do? Are we going to call it my name, or no? This has got to be institutional. So your company isn't Oscar Pierre and Company. It's global. It's got to be something that means something to people, that defines the purpose of the company. And so, as we know, actually this year we're celebrating the 500th anniversary of Magellan, discovering the Magellan Straits, trying to compete against the Portuguese and the Dutch, and the people that were very enterprising. But then after Magellan came Drake, of course. Magellan didn't terminate with the excursion. He was killed on the way. And so it was Sebastián Elcano who eventually circumnavigated. But the only guy that left and came back and completed the first circumnavigation was Drake, Sir Francis Drake. And he was a mixture of a pirate, a public servant, an adventurer, an explorer, and a great leader, a strong leader. And so he is the source of our inspiration. And so our objective is, over the next 30 to 35 years, build something that has meaning, and that can attract young talent, young ambitious people who are looking for a sense of purpose. We talk about the concept of thriving. And I would ask, if I could, each and every one of you that are perhaps listening in, are you thriving at Global? And what is to thrive? Is to lead a life with excitement and purpose. Are you having an exciting time? Do you have a sense of purpose by, working with your team members for an ideal that inspires you, something that you can talk to your boyfriend or girlfriend or mother or father or children about? Or is it just another job? Nothing wrong with having another job, of course. We all need to to work and to earn something for our daily chores. Huh? Nothing wrong with that. But ideally, you work in a place where much more than that, you thrive. And so you have a real sense of purpose. And what we try to emphasize in the companies where we're involved in, for instance, here I'm sitting in our school where we educate people to work as pizza experts. We have a little pizza company. And of course, we use global services in Spain. And I'm sitting in Santiago, Chile, in what we call the Drake College, which is where we train people. Very simple people, basic people, lots of immigrants, poor people. And we talk about AMP. In other words, we will strive to give you autonomy, mastery of something, and purpose. And so I would have to ask, whether we at Global are giving our Glovers a sense of autonomy. By definition, supposedly yes, because they are autonomous workers, supposedly. But we're going to be challenged by the very, I would say, regulated and institutionalized labor market controlled by unions. And so autonomy, mastery, we will teach you to do something and you can be a master of that. And I would have to ask, how many of our Glovers have become an entrepreneur and actually managing a bunch of other Glovers? Is that part of the idea? Possibly isn't. It possibly is impractical. In other words, a Glover becoming, an entrepreneur in himself or herself. But mastery in something, and then a sense of purpose. You're actually today allowing people to not leave their homes and have a decent meal, and without exposing themselves to the pandemic. And of course, we have been, in a way, benefited by a coronavirus, but it is all thanks to the people that are on the street delivering the stuff. We had to make significant adjustments in this little company because, of course, we still have restaurants, and the pizzas that are actually bought in the restaurant and consumed in the restaurant represented a significant percentage of our sales, approximately half in the less developed markets. And that is zero today. And so we've had to reinforce our relationship with aggregators and reinforce our own teams of people that are out there delivering pizza. So opportunities always are hidden in sometimes the worst of crises. And so that challenge, going back to your question, of beginning something new and interacting with a new young team of people, and perhaps helping them or supporting them, was something that I was aspiring to achieve at this stage in my life. And keep connected with the people on the street. I'm not an inventor of anything, and all I can perhaps contribute in this world is to help the situation of the simple people that are striving for a better life. And that's what I thought was very attractive in Global. And so I remember.
Let me stop here because I wanted to. I want to show people that what you're saying, there's this passion that you have for just going to the streets and stay connected with people in the streets, or by street I mean go a bit to the ground I just downloaded a few images I have and videos that he sent me, and I
Wow.
think it's almost
Hey.
every other week that Nicolas sends me. He just goes walk around and see and talks to Glovers, which is something that I think
Yeah, yeah.
we should all do a little bit more. Here, I think this one
Yes.
right
Aquí
there.
estamos con los muchachos de la primera línea. Todo el mundo habla hoy día de delivery, pero aquí le estamos poniendo cara,
This is not
un sello
a
personal a
Glovo.
lo que significa delivery. ¿Cómo le están yendo, muchachos, con el delivery? ¿Todo bien? ¿Más o menos? ¿Más o menos, Justo? ¿Y qué es lo que hay que hacer para que les vaya mejor?
Que se acabe el problema del coronavirus también.
Ah, pero el coronavirus no nos está ayudando para que haya más delivery.
No, lo que pasa es que cuando cayó el coronavirus como que han bajado un poco más los locales, no están abriendo.
Ah,
Ha bajado más la demanda.
muy bien.
Hay que se contagia también. Sí. Va a haber días que te va a ir súper bien.
There's a huge community of immigrants from Venezuela here, and some of them are top professionals, and many of them are people that are working as glovers or the equivalent. And so those were three Venezuelan young men that are trying to survive. And so that is what I find especially challenging and motivating. And so what Glovo is doing, how many glovers are related to Glovo in Spain and in Italy and in the countries? Do you have any idea how many people are involved with Glovo? But there are thousands of them.
Yeah, tens of thousands. It's over 50,000 today, 60.
Oh, 50,000. So that impact that you're having in the lives of those people is something quite extraordinary. And that is perhaps the main motivator behind Drake's involvement with Glovo, together with knowing that Glovo is run by people, led by people that are young, hardworking, and that do have a sense of purpose. And there's a member of your team that I haven't met him yet, but the person who's in charge of talent, people, I hope he's still with you, because I've had excellent references, and that is your main challenge, of course. That is what, if there's anything you've got to get right in the first place, it's that. Even more important than having the best IT systems or the best, whatever it is, disruptive technology. That is also very necessary in a company like Glovo.
And Nicolas, this concept, Glover happiness, which was the main thing we discussed, and for sure is the biggest way how we can have a better impact now through Glovo. And we think we're having a positive impact, but then I think every day we get something in the news that talks really bad, and it's sometimes really emotional about Glovo. No, words like slavery, exploitation, etc., etc. Did you have to manage similar feelings when you grew your business? Just what do you think about all the how to manage all the press?
Yeah, that's a very important point. I remember being in one of the courses I've been to in Harvard Business School, and we had to discuss the case of Walmart. And everybody, led by the teacher, was against Walmart, and they talked about the cost of low cost. And so the negative impact that Walmart was having in the United States and in the world. This whole idea of bringing in products at a lower price and generating a very efficient logistical structure, and the impact that was going to have, or was having, or is having, on various other competitors, on the industry. And so that situation, I'm talking about many years ago, that situation, how do you confront in Walmart, a severe attack on the core aspect of your strategy, which was was, and still is, of course, to bring a better assortment of goods at a lower price to the masses. And that generated a lot of critical reaction from politicians, of course from other competitors, but mostly from politicians. And so what sort of impact is this going to have on us? You know, you're going to, for instance, there's companies that I don't know, produce shoes or produce clothes, and you're bringing in all this cheap stuff, they're going to go broke. How do you explain that? And why is that, from an ethical point of view, appropriate? For instance, what Mercadona does, which is produce private labels, you know, and join forces with certain key suppliers and sell products at their own label. They're competing against, you know, the national brands. So whenever you disrupt, whenever you challenge, whenever you compete with the status quo, you better be prepared to receive all sorts of negative impact. And of course, what you're doing is that, yes, you are playing with fire, as I told you the first time I met you. You are challenging the establishment of the labor unions. You're challenging the, I would say, the traditional view of labor. And you are generating a new concept that gives people autonomy, freedom, and that allows them to have an option. The option of working in a factory or working as, you know, an employee in a big corporation is always open, but you're giving them another option. Of course, the other one is to just receive the paro, the dole, whatever it is, from the government. Glovo, we are giving those people an option. Is there anything wrong by giving those people an option? They can always choose to go back and work in a factory or whatever. But then that was up until, if you will, coronavirus. Now everything has changed. So if we were developing a new idea of how labor was going to be transformed because of technology, you know, IT, big data, and artificial intelligence. So the whole idea of labor was already changing. Who is going to take care of all the people that, you know, are not necessarily qualified in this age of, you know, information, where basic repetitive activities, with a very few exceptions, are all questioned. So today, companies like Glovo are even more important than they were before. Because now with this pandemic, we were all learning to work in a different way. And we have to be, of course, much more flexible than before. I don't think we're going to end up with a mercantilistic world where countries will go back to seeking protectionism and autarky. I think the whole idea of a connected world is here to stay, and because we have to continue seeking ways of being more efficient. So that means that we are going to have to continue to compete in an open, integrated, technological world. And so what do we do with people who, you know, emigrate from South America, if we're in Spain, or from Northern Africa? Of course, one option to say no more immigration, a bit like, you know, Trump's idea, and that will last for so long because we live in an integrated world, whether we like it or not, and we're going to have to confront these issues. And so, what Glovo is doing, and companies like Glovo are doing, is something which is incredibly necessary from a social point of view. So basically, Glovo is what I would call a social company, una empresa social. The shared value that you are creating is enormous. Now the problem is that it is very difficult to express, and people find it very difficult to understand. But behind me, you know, we have the 17 objectives for sustainable development, and I'm wearing this little thing which is, you know, the 17 objectives. This is the United Nations thing, and of course I don't believe so much in, you know, what the bureaucrats at the United Nations do or say. They're bureaucrats and they live off, you know, our taxes. But, you know, they're intelligent enough to develop concepts and, you know, cultural movements. And so stories about things. And this story is a good story. It shouldn't be theirs. It should be our story. And of course it is a global story. And so if you look at the 17, you know, objectives for sustainable development in the world, what is global doing? A great deal of this. So I invite you to review that. You can Google this thing, you know, the 17 sustainable objectives. And so what is the role of a company? Of course it is to be profitable. Of course it is to respond to its shareholders, first and foremost, because if you don't generate a profit sooner or later, it is an indication that you are misassigning resources, that you're not assigning resources efficiently. And of course, economics is the science that studies a very basic fact, the fact that our needs are unlimited and that there are limited resources. So we have unlimited needs with limited resources. And that's why, you know, free market capitalism helps with this very complex process of assigning scarce resources. That includes, of course, talent as the number one resource. So you have to be a very efficient business operator and assign resources properly and be very disciplined and generate a profit in the end, and hopefully distribute dividends. So that is, you know, a number one requirement, but it is a requirement to be able to do exactly this, to be a social actor. And so the whole idea of shared value, and those that might be interested in this thing, just Google shared value or Professor Michael Porter from Harvard Business School, and that'll give you sort of an intellectual background. And this whole idea, you know, of blitz scaling and moving fast and being a challenger to do what? Well, of course, to generate a profit with the resources that some investors have assigned to you for you to manage. But together with that, that is the requirement, to be able to be validated as a social actor, to be able to become a company that is, number one, respected in the most general sense. Number two, admired. Of course, admired because it is the best place to work. Admired because it's a great place to invest. Admired because it renders a great service. But admired as well because of its impact on society. And then, of course, ideally loved, because it does things in a special way. You know? And I suppose, I don't know, Apple is a company that is, we could think, is perhaps loved in a way. And everybody or many people have an Apple in their pockets, you know, and it is part of the culture and the design and all those aspects behind Apple. So that is the challenge, and that is the role of companies. And it is private enterprise, competitive private enterprise, that are going to get the world out of this slump. Coronavirus is one thing, and it's creating, of course, a severe, if you will, impact on people's health. But we're going to overcome that, and we are confronting a very severe downturn, economic downturn, and that is where private enterprise, competitive private enterprise, is going to make the difference, because governments are spending all their resources, you know, and we are, of course, dependent on our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to pick up the bill, because the level of debt that countries are going to assume is enormous. And it is people like us that have to produce the jobs and produce the income to be able to pay for that. Governments are not going to resolve the economic crisis that we are confronting. And for many companies, this economic crisis is a wonderful opportunity. Even if we were in the airline industry, I can assure you there are opportunities there. But we're not in that industry. We're in another industry. We're in the industry of, what is it? Logistics and delivery. We really are in the industry of people, you know, developing people, giving people a chance. That's what we do, really. What do we do at Global? We give people a chance. That is the core activity. That's what you do. And of course, there is a huge opportunity for a company that does that.
That's, I guess, a great way to close this. We're a bit out of time, so we cannot go into questions. But hey, thanks a lot, Nicolas. I think we got it's super clear of what we have to focus on beyond, you know, a P&L. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys soon in Barcelona. Of course, Barcelona is a wonderful place to be. Why is it so wonderful? Because it's always been a challenging city. You know, people, crazy people, you know, especially in art and in architecture. You know, they viewed the world in a different way. And even though it's still work in process, perhaps thanks to that, you know, La Sagrada Familia, the Sacred Family Cathedral, is an amazing, you know, crazy idea. And it is more than just a cathedral, a place of worship. It is a symbol. You're challenging, you know, the whole idea of architecture. And it is a wonderful symbol for the world. So I'm very glad that you're actually based in Barcelona. There's nothing wrong with being based in Berlin, like our German friends or Uber or wherever, you know. But the fact that you're connected to Barcelona, which is a place where that has congregated people with an open mind and that have challenged the status quo, that's fascinating. So you're also in the right place. It's a lovely city, a great place, and I always look forward to going to Barcelona. Of course, we have a daughter married there, and they're both doctors, gynecologists, but now they've had to change, and they're working with the coronavirus patients. So it's very interesting. You know, we have direct access to their lives. You know, and so we think we know pretty well what's going on in the, you know, those intensive care wards, and how you have to try and accompany somebody who's dying and who cannot, you know, have any contact with the rest of their family. So we understand the tragedy, but the other side of that tragedy is the beauty of what you're doing. You are giving thousands of people a chance. That is what Globo is all about. And you're in Barcelona, a great city. So thank you.
Goodbye.
Great. Look forward to seeing you soon. All the best. Very good. Success. And be bold. Very good. See you. Bye-bye.